Hello, I'm so happy to be here today. And we actually have Norton Wisdom is also with us painting. He just came on and lovely seeing you all. And I'm so excited about this show, chapter 4, focusing on Pull My Daisy. Thank you for all the setups, Anthony, and welcome.
And just so the younger people will know that you don't have to be almost 90 in order to achieve something, I would like to request Anthony de Marbier to please say hi to everybody and realize that we are all ages because it has to do with beauty and truthfulness, not with uh, age or fashion. Monsieur Anthony de Marbier.
Ah, David, you make me feel like the prettiest girl at the ball. Thank you.
Well, you're the handsomest guy at the ball, and give us older people a good memory of what it was like when we were your age, and hope we can have the same good vibes that you send out and a tiny bit of your technical knowledge, in addition to being a writer, composer, player, improviser, and performer yourself.
Oh, thank
I'm
you so much.
I'm flipping through people and I see that Joyce is on. Joyce, we're going to take your questions today if you have some. And Doug Yeager is here. David's manager and a mega talent himself will be a special guest soon. So there's some hellos.
So I'll begin the reading, and I'm putting on my glasses, which I didn't wear till I was 88 when I was a boy. Now I'll be almost 90. So for those of you who don't wear glasses yet, I don't blame you. And if you need them, don't be ashamed, because if you can see better, you can read better, and you might miss out on something otherwise. Vanity, unfortunately, doesn't really help out erudition. This is chapter 4. Last week we began with how we stumbled and fumbled our way into making the film Pull My Daisy, and this will be a little bit, and then we're going to have our wonderful excerpts from the film, and then our special guest, Dean Birkenkamp. Chapter 4, Spontaneous Commotion, the Making of Pull My Daisy. A few weeks later, Alfred Leslie called me up. He, composer Edgard Varese, and poet Arnold Weinstein had encouraged me since I first came to New York back in 1955 to pursue my dreams of being a composer, combining all the musical styles I felt belonged together. Alfred Leslie and Arnold Weinstein always made me feel anything was possible. They were native-born New Yorkers with soul, and they became friends for life. David, I have some exciting news, said Alfred. Jack has written an extraordinary outline for a silent film he would like to have made. It's based on a larger work, but it would be perfect as a short documentary. It's a charming vignette, a simple story that could be a real addition to the repertoire of the new cinema. Robert Frank will film it. I'll direct it in my art studio. You'll write the music as well as appear in it, and Jack will narrate it. Jack's already told me about it, I said. Are you interested? Sure. We have a fabulous cast, said Alfred. Only one professional actor, Jack Youngerman's wife, Delphine Seydig. She only speaks French, but since it's a silent film, it doesn't matter. She has an amazing presence and dignity. Gregory Corso, Allen Ginsberg, and Peter Orlovsky will also play themselves. Mary Frank, Dodie Miller, Larry Rivers, Alice Neal, and Richard Bellamy from the art world have all agreed to do it. We'll all meet next week to go over the outline and start filming shortly after our get-together. Jack wants you to be yourself, of course, but your character's name is Mez McGillicuddy, the cheerful composer French horn player with a zonked-out personality. Typecasting. I'd be perfect for the part, I said. Just don't tell any of the great actors whose plays I write music for that I'm appearing in a movie. I don't know how to act. I have enormous respect for those actors and how dedicated they are to their art. You're not supposed to act, said Alfred. None of you should try to act. Since none of you except Delphine Seyrig are actors, you'll all be your delightful, crazy, anarchistic selves. Uh, 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 it should be quite a film, I said tentatively. Definitely, said Alfred, brimming with confidence and enthusiasm. We'll fit our filming into everyone's work schedules. Whenever you're free, come over. I know you're composing a score for the Phoenix Theater production, but it's only a few blocks away from my studio. Whenever you drop in, we can film you doing something. Everybody will be floating in and out. It should be fantastic. It can be our way of honoring Jack's work and the enduring bonds of friendship we all share. This will be our statement. Painters, poets, musicians, photographers, all capturing a moment of our joy together. Aren't you going to be in it? I asked. Alfred was great looking, with wild black curls and the physique of a champion athlete. He had been Mr. Bronx a few years ago in a bodybuilding competition. He emanated an unlimited joie de vivre and charisma that charmed everyone who knew him. He was already acclaimed as an important young American artist and so articulate and spellbinding in his conversation that the musicians from our quartet at the Five Spot in 1957 still called him the professor. No, David, said Alfred. I'll have my hands full just directing. I'll stay behind the camera. I'll try to guide our cast into the telling of Jack's story in a truthful way. No one needs to act. I'll try to guide our cast. We don't want anything phony. Just like a true faux film, everyone will be themselves, and yet will somehow keep Jack's idea intact. It will seem improvised, but we'll end up having a film that exudes freshness and vitality. I talked to Robert Frank the next night at the Cedar Tavern. He was acknowledged by all of us as a photographer who transcended the definition of what photography was supposed to be about. His photographs of ordinary subjects had such a strange beauty that all the abstract painters who rebelled against representational art loved Robert's work. He captured on film what most of us saw every day and never paid any attention to. Like Jack, he could see the diamonds in the sidewalk. Robert was brought up in Switzerland and inspired by the work of the American photographer Walker Evans. He came to America with a vision of his own. There was no one else like him. Robert and his brilliantly talented and beautiful wife, Mary Frank, were always a joy to be with. Both were pure artists, admired and loved by all who knew them. Robert was quieter and more thoughtful than most of us, but his eyes spoke for him. When he looked your way, you could feel you were in the presence of an old soul, somehow surviving in the wilds of New York. You could feel him seeking, searching, observing, and remaining calm, even when surrounded by insanity. This was a redeeming quality, considering the impossible task he was about to undertake. Filming a group of incorrigible, individualistic, hell-raising, fun-loving lunatics Alfred had assembled for the cast of Pull My Daisy. I think we'll achieve something of value from this experience, said Robert. This is a special time, David, a special moment in the history that we can capture all of these people together. This unlikely cast of characters should be perfect to tell Jack's story. We shall see. Robert, I said, you could photograph an old rusty tin can lying in the gutter and make something beautiful. You're the tops, Pops. You're much too kind, said Robert softly, with the sardonic smile he always had when he was complimented. I don't need your approval, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. I know you'll do a good job of writing the music. As far as your portrayal of your character, Mez McCullicuddy, in the film, just be yourself. Don't try to act. Jack told you it's really you, but according to his description of your character in the 3-page outline he gave us, you're supposed to be a hip tape man. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. It doesn't matter. We'll capture the special moments, David. Everyone's diverse personalities will make it somehow work. The day we finally began filming Pull My Daisy, it didn't have that title until later, was a prelude to weeks of chaotic, fun-filled madhouse clowning. Somehow, this endless party was guided by Alfred Leslie's direction and Robert Frank's ability to film the unfilmable. Fun-filled madhouse, clowning. Both of them managed to stay calm, supportive, and organized day and night, patiently telling the cast exactly what our motivation should be, where we should stand, and what we were supposed to say, so that Jack could later lip sync key moments of the dialogue when he narrated the film. We must be faithful to Jack's story, said Alfred over and over as we tried to each outdo one another by surprising Alfred and Robert with unexpected pranks. Alfred was meticulous and devoted in trying to coordinate and guide every detail of the film, as he was when he was creating one of his masterful oil paintings. We were his palette. What putty in your hands, said Peter Orlovsky. In one of the first scenes we filmed, Gregory Corso and Allen Ginsberg were supposed to be engaged in a deep conversation about poetry. Before they came into view, the cameras made a slow pan, showing every grimy detail of Alfred's studio. But it had already been trashed by us during a cast party 3 hours before we even started filming. As the camera was being set to begin the slow pan, Gregory Corso lit up an enormous joint of Mexican pot. This is my Oscar-winning shot, Leslie, he shouted, taking a large drag from the joint and a slug from a gallon bottle of Gallo wine. He looked like a crazy Jerry Lewis. I'm ready for my close-up soon as I finish drinking my breakfast. Gregory took another slug from the gallon bottle and sat on the floor with his head between his knees. I think they're about to film us, Gregory, said Allen Ginsberg softly. I'm hip, Allen. I'm getting into character, said Gregory, trying futilely to light up a joint of pot that was now extinguished and soaked with the red Gallo wine that Gregory had spilled on it. Now, Gregory, said Alfred softly, we're about to embark on a great adventure together. You must remember your character's relationship in this scene with the character of your fellow poet, Allen Ginsberg. You have to concentrate on the melancholy nature and loneliness of the hopeless situation that you and Allen share as poets, trying to survive in a society that ignores its prophets and cultural pioneers. You have to show the feelings of brotherhood that you and Allen share and the compassion you have for one another in your mutual struggle for acceptance. At the same time, radiate a feeling of strength and optimism to show the audience you understand underlying heroic nature. Got it. Got it, Alfie. No problem. Roll it, said Gregory, who had rolled a fresh joint of pot. Robert began to slowly pan the camera in a circle, revealing the filthy dishes in the sink, the cockroach infested stove, and the soiled aromatic underwear and crusty mismatched socks strewn over the back of a broken down chair. All right, whispered Alan. In about 20 seconds, you'll be in the shot, Gregory. Remember, you are both discussing your commitment of bringing new forms to American verse by stretching all of the accepted boundaries of 20th century poetry. You and Alan are cultural pioneers. You got it, whispered Gregory. A few seconds later, as the camera completed its slow pan and focused on them, Alan, with one lightning fast gesture, as swift and unexpected as a champion boxer's sneak right hand delivering a knockout punch, dropped his pants and underwear. Before they had hit the floor, wrapping around the bottom of his sneakers, he was drenched with a mixture of red wine, hamburger grease, ketchup, and French fried potatoes, poured over his head by Gregory from a large paper container from the diner down the block. How do you like that Stanislavski method actor motivation bit, Leslie? Huh? Rasped Gregory as the joint of marijuana hanging from his lips. Is that a Marlon Brando actor studio shot, Alfie? Does that show how America treats her poets? Alan broke into a buck and wing dance step, flapping his arms as he tripped over his pants and underwear that encircled his feet, and Gregory began to somersault on the floor, scooping up stale French fries, some of which he began eating while throwing the others at Robert Frank's camera, while the rest of us watched this unusual interpretation of two poets having a scholarly discussion. Robert kept the camera rolling. That's not what we had in mind at all, but it's quite interesting, said Alfred as Gregory knocked over a lamp during one of his somersaults. Delphine Seyrig, the classically trained French actress who would later star in Last Year in Marienbad, stood by stoically, waiting for her cue. She was supposed to enter a quiet room and serve Alan and Gregory a glass of wine and dust off the table in preparation for the homecoming of her railroad train conducting husband, played by Larry Rivers, based on the real life character of Neil Cassidy. Larry Rivers was playing this role and was wearing a ratty looking conductor's uniform with a real train conductor's hat. Delphine was such a disciplined actress that she managed to make her entrance. She had to worm her way through Alan, who was hopping around the room, trying not to trip over his pants and underwear, while Gregory continued to somersault around the studio. They were joined by Peter Orlovsky, who made an unplanned entrance, wrapped in wet towels, brushing his teeth with one hand and waving a toilet plunger with the other. I'm here to clean up America, he shouted over and over. Every time Delphine would try to enter into the shot, Peter would unwrap a towel from his body with the hand he was holding to the toothbrush in and dangle the towel in front of her. Perhaps this could be construed as a statement of trying to shield Delphine's character from the pain and humiliation of the poet's sense of rejection, said Alfred hopefully, as Robert kept filming. Just as Delphine had run out of ways to try to enter the shot, Larry Rivers made an unexpected entrance in his railroad conductor's outfit, honking on his alto saxophone, cheeks blown out, eyes staring wildly in different directions, while he did a waltz step punctuated with an occasional pirouette. Finally, Delphine could no longer deal with the total chaos. Alfred, C'est impossible, je ne peux pas travailler comme ça. Alfred, this is impossible. I can't possibly work like this. I'm sorry, Delphine, said Alfred in a remarkably calm and quiet way. Quoi? She responded. What? Oh, God, I forgot she hardly speaks any English, David. Tell her in French she was marvelous. But we probably will have to do this scene again, and we'll have to lose some of the improvisatory moments and remain more faithful to Jack's initial ideas. Still, I like the spirit of Gregory, Alan, and Peter that they're bringing to all of this. However, we don't want to peak too soon. We should save some of the excessive behavior until the end of the discussion about poetic form to give the scene a more lyrical tone. What do you mean, Alfie? Said Gregory. I was getting into it. That bit where I poured everything over Alan's head. It's like King Kong being attacked by the bastards in uniform before he falls off the Empire State Building. The individual being screwed by the state. It's the old 1930s social realism shot, Alfie. You got it? Oscar level material. Come on, man. You're supposed to be directing a movie. Gregory, I love your vitality and sense of the cinema, but perhaps if all of you are a little less creative initially and stick a bit closer to Jack's outline, the improvisatory sense can remain, although it must be couched in a slightly more structured framework, said Alfred. Let me wipe some of the wine and grease off my camera lens, said Robert Frank quietly in his cultured Swiss accent. Don't worry, Alfred. We'll find some moments. Dave, rasped Gregory, play a night in Tunisia. I want to teach Delphine how to dance. Come on over here. Come over to Gregory, Delphine, baby. We gotta give this film some sex appeal. Gregory lurched towards Delphine, who recoiled in horror. Don't be upset, Delphine, I said to her in French. I know this is not what you expected, but none of us know what to expect. Gregory and Alan and Peter are just having fun by seeing how far they can go before Alfred and Robert go berserk. But Alfred and Robert will never go berserk. And when the whole film is done, they'll make it into something beautiful. I don't know how, but I know they will. Remember, Jack will narrate it when it's all put together. The more obnoxious they become, the more it justifies your eventual anger, culminating and throwing us all out of your house. Ah, said Delphine, je comprends. I understand. It's like the mad woman of Chaillot, Delphine, I said in French, except you are the sane one. Bon, ça va. Pas de problème. Good. Everything's cool. No problem, said Delphine, looking relaxed. Did you tell her to stay calm? And that's we love her? Asked Alfred. Uh, kind of, I said. All right, everybody. Now that we've established and improvised, let's try to do that first scene again. Alfred spoke as if he were addressing a meeting of aldermen on a Sunday church luncheon. Nothing any of us did seemed to faze him. Alan, if you could back again and put on your underwear and pants, we'll try to do this scene one more time. I think we have a simply marvelous sense of what we can do in one take. The less editing, the better. Peter, if you could return the towels and toilet plunger to the bathroom and put on your clothes, and Alan and Gregory, just stay as you are. The French fries and ketchup in your hair give the impression of a poet so obsessed by his work that he has no concern whatever about his appearance to others. I know you will all do it brilliantly this time. Remember, you are poets discussing your work. Just remain calm and natural. Don't act. Be yourselves. The room was quiet as Robert Frank began to pan slowly towards Gregory, Alan, and Peter. Larry Rivers tightened the rubber bands holding together some of his saxophone keys, and Delphine Seyrig stood erect with her head bowed down as if in prayer. Ahee! Ahee! An ear-splitting series of squeal, snarl, bark howls suddenly filled the room as Gregory Corso, screaming like a banshee, leapt on all fours across the room, jumped up off the floor through the open window onto the metal fire escape attached to the other side of the building, brandishing a Raggedy Ann doll that had been lying on the floor, and clambered down the fire escape to the street below. Waving the doll over his head, he ran through the midday traffic into the middle of the street, shouting insults at the startled passengers. Most of the people in their cars locked their doors and looked the other way. I ran outside into the cold January street to make sure Gregory would not get run over or freeze to death without a jacket. One young woman jammed on her brakes, stopped as Gregory was dodging traffic while shouting at the passing cars. "What are you doing?" she asked incredulously. "Would you like a ride to Bellevue Hospital?" "Ah, sweetheart, we're making a movie. See that camera up there?" He pointed to the open window of Alfred's studios, where Robert Frank was filming Gregory's antics. "Can I be in it?" she said, suddenly opening up her purse and putting on some lipstick. "Sure," said Gregory. "Park your car and come on up to the studio." "Are there any stars in it?" she asked, putting the final touches on her lips and opening up her box of mascara. "Yeah, baby, you and me," rasped Gregory. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm Fabian Fangool, the Roman heartthrob," said Gregory. "You can see all my films in the foreign language art houses. I just won Italy's equivalent of the Oscar, the Stugatz. I got it on me. I worked hard for the Stugatz." He brandished the doll. The woman looked dumbfounded. "Who's he?" she asked suspiciously, looking at me in my moth-eaten gray floppy sweater. As I tried to direct traffic while subtly attempting to pull Gregory back to the sidewalk to avoid his getting run over in the traffic jam that he was causing. "That's Dave," said Gregory. "He looks after my daughter," he said, holding up the doll again to her window and patting the doll on his head. "Say hello to the nice lady," he cooed in the doll's ear. "What?" she said incredulously. "Well, on the film shoots, Dave also doubles as my babysitter. The rest of the time, he's my valet," said Gregory. "Hey, Dave, get my jacket pressed. Roll another joint for me and one for my new co-star and park her car. What's your name, baby? We make a beautiful couple." "You're sick," she responded, and with tires squealing, she drove off. "She could have had a great film career. She blew it," Gregory yelled to Robert through cupped hands. "Robert, Alfie, how was that? Was that the ultimate uncontrollable lust for life shot or what? Print it. We're all going to be rich and famous." "Shut up, loudmouth," screamed the owner of a nearby small shop as I gently led Gregory to the curb. "All you guys are frightening my customers. You've all been partying and smoking the wacky weed up there all day. I would have called the cops on you already, but Leslie's a good guy. I can't understand how he can put up with you schlemiels. Don't any of you have jobs?" "Yeah, I got a job. I'm working day and night starring in this film to send my daughter here to college. Say hello to the nice man, sweetie, said Gregory, holding up the doll and waving its arm at the store owner. Very funny, said the store owner sarcastically. I noticed he was trying to suppress a real laugh as he turned to go back to his shop. I'm spreading the word, whispered Gregory confidentially to me as we entered the building to go back upstairs to Alfred's studio to continue filming. Advanced publicity! I'm revealing highlights of the film. It's the coming attraction shot. We entered Alfred's studio, and Robert was already filming another scene with the young art gallery owner, Richard Bellamy, who was playing the bishop, clad in a black suit and an overcoat, similar to the dress style of Orthodox Jews. The painter, Alice Neal, was sitting in front of a squeaky pump organ, playing the old rugged cross. She was the bishop's wife in the film, dressed like the perfect, conservative, dutiful mate. Just in time, David, said Alfred. You're a significant person in this scene. I'll cue you when you're supposed to make your entrance. Just carry your French horn in the case. Don't take it out to play it yet. Say hello to everyone in the room and make them feel comfortable. The bishop and his wife are having a dignified conversation with Delphine and drinking tea. After the bishop's wife stops playing the organ, then she and her daughter and the bishop will be introduced to Alan, Gregory, and Peter Orlovsky, who will talk to them about their poetry. I stood quietly next to Delphine Sireg. This is most bizarre, she said to me in French. I know they won't do what they've been told to do. Well, I said, I'm sure they'll try to calm down. Pretty soon, everybody will do what Alfred and Robert tell us to do. Just as Alan moved in and Alice Neal got up from the pump organ to rejoin her daughter, played by Sally Gross, the dancer, who was sitting prim and quiet on the couch drinking tea, Alan and Peter Orlovsky came charging into the studio from a tiny closet in the back, both stark naked, waving dry flowers, while Peter croaked his own atonal version of Cole Porter's Love for Sale. They certainly are uninhibited, said Delphine to me in French. Your input as poets is invaluable, said Alfred graciously. Nonetheless, I think we should try to stick to Jack's storyline. Let's try to restrain ourselves. We're searching for a quiet moment. Ain't the cameras rolling, said Gregory. Alfie, you're the Cecil B. DeMille of the Beat Generation. Alfred, I think you'd better tell Jack to wait a few more days before he comes to see us making the film, said Robert Frank quietly. Out of all this, we will have some great moments, but so far we have wandered a bit from his script. We don't need a script, said Gregory. We need more wine. A week later, Jack called me and said he was going to come by to watch us film his work. By this time, Gregory, Alan, and Peter had influenced all the rest of us into group hysteria. Often, Robert would laugh so loud that he could hardly hold on to his camera as we celebrated what we knew would be our final time as underground film stars. Often we would party for hours before we even started filming, and by the time Robert had turned his camera on, we were too zonked to even know we were being filmed. Robert and Alfred remained sober and committed. So did Delphine Seyrig. The rest of us succumbed to the temperature and temptations of wine and weed. The afternoon that Jack arrived, we celebrated even longer than usual before filming. Jack looked bemused as he studied the shambles of Alfred's usually immaculate studio. The floor was now strewn with crushed beer cans, soda pop bottles, and empty gallon jugs of red Gallo wine, sticking to dried up puddles spilled by their sides. Discarded wax paper wrappers from half-eaten pastrami sandwiches moved ever so slightly as hordes of cockroaches feasted on their greasy remains. Ground up donuts, stale French fries covered in crusted ketchup were now hard as rocks, and they were surrounded by scraps of paper with poems and sketches that had been torn up, old underwear, towels, and socks that stood up by themselves had fallen from the broken down chair. Good God, Alfred, my shoes are stuck to the floor, said Jack, laughing. Neil's house never looked this bad. Carolyn wouldn't have ever allowed it. It's effective, though, to show why Delphine, who is playing Carolyn, became so furious that she threw everyone out at the end, said Alfred. Jack slumped quietly into a chair, viewing the madhouse surroundings. It was 3:30 in the afternoon, and it seemed like a New Year's Eve party at a mental institution where the patients had taken over. Alfred came out, knelt by Jack's side. We have an excellent esprit de corps among our cast members, said Alfred in a soothing tone. So I've noticed, said Jack, as Larry, Peter, and Gregory tried to lead everyone into the room in an almost unrecognizable rendition of Boulevard of Broken Dreams, while Alan did a herky-jerky ballet number clad in a sheet, like a Roman senator flying and swatting flies. They're getting into character, Jack, said Alfred encouragingly. I hope they get out of character, said Jack, looking dismayed. I want them to do something that relates to what I wrote. Alfred paused and then responded with the classic filmmaker's response to anyone worried about a film they participate in. Don't worry, Jack. It'll all be fixed in the editing. In that case, Alfred, laissez les bons temps rouler. Let the good times roll, said Jack, getting up from his chair and doing an unsteady foxtrot with Delphine Seyrig while Larry Rivers honked on his alto saxophone, accompanying the braying of the cast of Pull My Daisy as we all tried to sing Lush Life. 2 hours later, Jack returned to his chair and listened to Gregory and Peter giving a long harangue about what they would do when they became elected as the new president and vice president of the United States. When are they going to start filming? Asked Jack. The cast is not totally disciplined yet, said Alfred. Don't worry, Jack. In many ways, this is marvelous, Jack, said Robert enthusiastically. Nothing is going as planned. We'll create an extraordinary film. This is a moment in time that can never be captured again. It's good you're here, Jack, I said. We'll get started eventually. About 9 p.m., Alfred clapped his hands. All right, everybody. Let me please have your attention. We've been here over 6 hours. I think we're prepared to shoot a scene and show Jack how much we respect his work. Let's all settle down. Settle down, shouted Gregory. You know what happens if you ever settle down? That's the Hollywood shot. Swimming pools and broads. Big business gets you to sell out and wear a tie, and then, pow, in comes the Gestapo and blows your ass away. We gotta make a film like the one Picasso made that no one else can. Stand watching. We gotta make a film like Picasso's, the heavy, artsy, avant-garde shot. We need you in the film, Jack. You'll play a football player who gets a concussion and starts to hallucinate.
He thinks he's the king of France and marries Delphine, who he thinks is the sister of the Dauphin. But she's actually a transvestite named Hymen. Yeah, got it, Jack? It's like Shakespeare, where a man's a man and a woman am too.
Gregory gave me a conspiratorial wink and pointed towards the tiny bathroom, signaling for me to go there.
Now, Jack,
Said Gregory.
the subplot thickens. The sheriff comes into town and mows down the troublemakers. Then you dump Delphine and you marry the sheriff.
But Gregory, said Jack gently, I don't want to be in the film. I just want to see what I wrote, portrayed by all of you just the way I wrote it. I have a plot,
So what?
said Gregory.
Nobody in New York City pays any attention to the plot when they go to see a flick. They're going to the movies to eat popcorn, to get high, to take a nap, to try to cop a feel from their date, and to get out of the house. All they wait for at the end of the movie when the sheriff comes to town and mows down the troublemakers. Hey, Dave!
He yelled.
I said to Jack that all they wait for in the end of the movie when the sheriff comes to town and mows down the troublemakers.
Mon Dieu. Jesus, save me from my friends, said Jack.
Hey, Dave, wherever you're hiding, that was your entrance cue. You're supposed to be a hip musician and used to be a boxer and a gym teacher. You're supposed to have good timing. Your timing sucks.
Gregory banged with both fists on the bathroom door and screamed at the top of his lungs.
Again, Dave! They all wait for the end of the movie when the sheriff comes to town and mows down the troublemakers.
The door to Alfred's bathroom came crashing off its hinges as I charged out of the tiny bathroom, having made a rapid change into a full cowboy suit and Stetson hat, firing 2 toy cap pistols at Alan, Gregor, and Peter, who rolled around on the floor, doing several death scenes apiece, while Richard Bellamy in his black bishop's outfit began an improvised, stoned-out eulogy, and Alice Neal, sat down and played Nearer My God to Thee on the squeaky pump organ.
How was that, Jack?
Said Gregory.
The John Wayne heavy cowboy hero shot. Man, Dave messed up his timing.
I'm sorry, Gregory. I heard my cue, but I was making my costume change to surprise Jack, and I couldn't unlock the bathroom door. I'm sorry, Alfie. I had to break it down.
No excuses, Dave,
said Gregory.
Your timing sucks. You'll never make it as an actor. Stick to music and be prepared to go back to your old job as a part-time postal worker you had. The theater needs performers with timing and charismatic personalities.
As he completed the last 2 words of his sentence, he took a flying leap, making a perfect landing, arms outstretched like a ballet dancer, onto the lap of Kerouac, and whipped out an unopened bottle of Thunderbird wine from the side of his coat pocket.
A little surprise we cooked up for you, Jack, to show you we love you, man. A la santé,
he said, opening the bottle of wine and toasting Jack. If you love me, quit goofing and let Alfred and Robert finish the film, said Jack. I want to see my ideas come to life off the page. This film is part of the story of my life. Delphine Siri came over and put her arm on Jack's shoulder, who sat in the armchair as Gregory ranted away. Gregory crawled off Jack's lap, rolled a corncob-sized super joint of pot, lit up, and began another rambling monologue about his time in jail. I know he is strange, Jack, said Delphine soothingly in French, but he loves you. We all do. We only want you to have some fun. You look so sad. You are the artist we all love and admire. Your books are exquisite. We only want to make you laugh a little and find some joy in life. You are such a magnificent improviser. Don't worry. Whatever the film, if you can call it that, turns out to be, you can tie it together with your narration. I can't understand much English, but when you and David performed together, it sounded like angels singing. Don't worry. Let them be silly. Let them have fun. We'll salvage something beautiful out of all this to honor you. When you put your words to the film, it will sing like the angels sing. You and David can do it. Robert and Alfred can do it. We can all do it. I don't know how, but I know we will. Jack smiled and kissed Delphine's hand like an old Breton nobleman. He said, On va voir. That we'll see. Jack called me the morning after his long day and the night of watching our filmed psychodrama. I'm not coming back to see any more goofing around. I'll watch whatever it ends up being and narrate it like a jazz soloist. Just like Bird at Massey Hall, the live concert where Charlie Parker does everything live and it's all perfect. And whenever Bud Powell would play a chord that sounded wrong to the uninitiated listener, Bird would create something perfect to complement it. I'm ready, Davy. Je suis prêt. I am ready. A week later, we finished filming Pull My Daisy. We had a final all night dusk till dawn cast party that was not much different from the days and nights we were filming, except Alfred Leslie and Robert Frank could finally relax. They no longer had to put up with us. Gregory handed out cigars to all of us. He, Peter, and Alan stopped clowning around for the first time in weeks and read us all some of their latest work. Delphine did a monologue in French. Jack and I played together. At dawn, we all went home exhausted. Our underground film careers were over at last. We still had to have the film edited, have Jack narrate it, and have me score the film and the title song, Pull My Daisy. I explained to Jack that Robert had the monumental job of finding those moments he could wait, which he had waited for with endless patience. And he assembled a film that could resemble Jack's initial storyline in some way. And next week, we'll talk about the extraordinary spontaneous narration that Jack did. But now we want to before we interview our very, very special guest, Mr. Dean Berkenkamp, who can talk about all the extraordinary books that he has edited and all his life, not only in literature, but in music, where he studied composition in college, and all of the people that he's worked with, like Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, extraordinary intellectuals and writers, and all the people that he's appreciated in the many worlds of music, art, jazz, and poetry, and the things that he's done in his life. We're going to have some excerpts from Pull My Daisy. And as an advance notice, next week we have the wonderful actress who is nice enough to come and take her valuable time. She moved back to New York, Brenda Vaccaro. Many of you remember her, of course, from her magnificent performance in the film Midnight Cowboy, but she's been in countless movies and also is a great stage actress and just a wonderful, warm person. And approaching the theater, appreciates the theater, music, art, poetry, and anything all of us do as being a way to pursue something honorably in life. And she'll be very inspiring, especially to all you younger folks, to realize you could spend your whole life doing something that you love and share some of that with others, which of course is what Jack's spirit was all about. We're going to show just a tiny bit of the film, the crazy parts that I described in the book, including the cowboy shot, fortunately, were edited out. Can't beat the cutting room floor. And the film that Jack narrated was a lot of fun. And all these years later, we did it in 1959. It has a lot of bearing. And of course, Jack's scroll was an example of formality and spontaneity. And the person who conserved that scroll, the wonderful Jim Canary, is coming back for the 4th week in a row to bless us, because he's the conservator of the scroll who helps to keep it healthy. And we're delighted now to have all of you join us and sing a few little excerpts of Pull My Daisy. And for those of you who have an iPhone, that's all you need to make your own movie. And I'm sure all of you can do it.
Thinking about anything in particular. Perhaps we sit in some kind of quiet bliss. And he goes on trying to explain it because he really knows what he's talking about. And he says, angels and ministers that do stand before me. And you say, why? Angels and ministers? Here comes old Miss McGillicuddy right down the line there, banging on the organ. There says, Daddy, oh, Daddy, she says, oh, if that was not enough. Oh, Miss McGillicuddy disturbed her many a midnight evening. And oh, Milo, he's quite pleased to see him there because he don't, but at the same time, he has to talk to Bishop. So it's all right, says, perfect, all right, he's all right, he's my good friend. Oh, buddy, Mez. Mez gone in the toilet to do something. They sit around the table. Now they're getting kind of congenial. By God, even the woman feels good. And she walks around, old Milo there, and sits down, and the bishop is feeling pretty good there. He's got some other things to tell him. He's got his own thoughts. And meanwhile, Nez coming out of the toilet. Yes, sir, he says. He comes out and shakes hands with the bishop's sister, How Young. And he knows old Alan there and shakes hands with the shapes up hands with the bishop's mother. And then he comes up and he shakes hands with the bishop himself. Yes, kind of strange and interesting evening, says the bishop.
Anthony, there's no sound. Anthony, there's no
That's okay.
sound on the video.
Maybe you could stop it. I could say, mention that people can watch it on YouTube.
I think Anthony's watching the Laker game and it's down to the wire.
Oh,
I think that's really what's going on. Anthony.
I'm right here, actually.
Great. There's no sound on the video, love.
yeah. We better cut back and I'll tell everybody they can watch it on YouTube. Can we go back to the show, Anthony, because you can't hear it? Okay.
The angel of silence hath flown over all their heads. Yes, it's early, late, or middle Friday evening in the universe. All the sounds of time are pouring through the window in the key. All I dear thee in windows, and me darvelled, be darvelled, mad, be bedraggled robes that rolled in the cave of Amontillado. The strange thoughts you young people have. Is everything holy? Is alligators holy, Bishop? Is the world holy? Is the basketball holy? Is the organ of man holy? The bishop says, what? Holy, holy? He said, oh, my mother wants to play the organ? The mother says, holy, yes, but I want to play a little music here. And Pat, being a musician, Pat Mez McGillicuddy gets up and says, Peter, give me the chair so I can let her play on the organ there. It's a little low. I need a pillow or something. I'll get you a pillow. Hearing these people talk about holy, I thought I would pretend to play some little inspirational number.
Hello, Dean.
Hello, Pamela. How are you?
I'm excellent. So nice to have you with us today.
Thank you.
It's a treat to see you, Dean. And I should say to the people watching the Italian subtitles, you can see the film in English and hear the good sound and also hear everything Jack's amazing narration and the music and all that. And Jack's extraordinary improvised dialogue that somehow made it look like that's what he had in mind in the first place. And they took the 50 hours of clowning and made it into a 29-minute, almost a film. And it was really fun. And now, of course, it's shown in colleges and schools as an example of culture or lack of culture, depending on who your teacher is, of the 1950s. Actually, it was a lot of fun. And when Seinfeld became such a big hit, they interviewed some of the people and they said, well, our role model was, since we decided to have a television show about nothing, to have a film about nothing as the guideline, which was, I guess, sort of a strange compliment. But I think the wonderful thing is, especially for all you younger folks who would like to be a filmmaker, an actor, a composer, whatever, make your own film. Get an iPhone, and you can do it all by yourself if necessary. And the door is open now with the internet for everyone to have a chance to do that. You don't have to spend 20 years trying to raise money and then get shut out and have it massacred by other people. You can do the best that you can do. And the beauty of the film, of course, is Jack's extraordinary narration. And the reason the poor simultaneous translator in Italian couldn't fill up the screen with all of Jack's extraordinary improvised narration. So that only gives a slight idea of what he was doing. But you can see it in its entirety, several versions on YouTube. There's Alfred Leslie's Pull by Daisy and Robert Frank's Pull by Daisy, and they're both the same movie, and they're both wonderful. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce our special guest, and accompanied by the wonderful artist who you just saw. He recently did, Mr. Wisdom originally did a terrific Sunday night performance of John Lennon's music played by an extraordinary organist, and he did his improvising artwork. We're so glad he's here. And of course, Mr. Jim Canary, who's the conservator of the scroll. And then we're going to have all of you hopefully make a few comments or ask some questions. And it's just a delight to be here. And we hope you'll encourage your friends to be creative. And hopefully you'll all make a better movie yourselves. So Dean, thank you for coming.
David, I want to remind you of the first couple of times we met. Just briefly, on the first time, you were on a mad dash leaving Arthur Miller's funeral in New York City, where I believe you performed some music for your friend and collaborator, the great playwright Arthur Miller. And the plane from LaGuardia to Denver was greatly delayed, and you finally landed our living room at 1:30 in the morning, and we get to know each other, and about 2:30 or 3, you sit down to play the piano, and my daughters are perhaps asleep upstairs. But more importantly, getting to you as a writer, I'd like to remind you of the wonderful dinner we had in the Tajikistani tea house, the beautiful temple in Boulder. And at one point, we talked, this is where we first talked of your new manuscript, which we later called in the book Upbeat, 9 Lives of a Musical Cat. And but it was our first real business conversation. And at one point, you pulled out your computer because you wanted to show me something. And you opened it up, your laptop, and I noticed, I saw the numerals on the number keys and all of that, but all of the letter keys were blanks. You worn them off. And that's one thing I think people know you as a musician, as a writer for film, for stage theater, for your operas, for your folk music, of course, your jazz performance and your classical compositions, but you were writing all of the time. And we work together often in my house where you stay or your house when you stay, and you're always writing. And I think that may be something that not all of our listeners realize.
Well, I think, Dean, we were both fortunate being brought up in I would say the countryside. I was actually brought up on a farm, and you were brought up in the Midwest.
Next to a farm.
And, that gives you a good work ethic. Everybody who has that background realizes, I'm sure your dad said the same thing to you as my father did, which was by the sweat of thy brow, thou shalt earn thy keep. And the idea, if you ask a question because you don't know, it doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you're smart, because someone who's a neighbor or a farmer or a member of your community, if you know how to say, please, thank you, and could you tell me, and could you tell me that again, please, that you're not stupid if you don't know everything or pretend to. And I think that makes you scholarly and inquisitive for the rest of your life. And that includes working hard and then knowing how to have a good time when you're done your chores.
Yes. Well, I can say that having had you in my house for probably a few months, different weeks added up, that David works all the time. He's never not working, and it goes on until he goes to sleep, but always with the greatest joy. And he stops to tell another great story about working with Frank Sinatra or Johnny Depp or whoever it is. But you're working all the time. And also, I think about you speaking on stage at times about how you learned to play a Lakota Indian flute, and how you learned to sing Lakota, and how you had to work so hard to get it just right. Or I think about you when you were called to a conference and performances in Nairobi, but you asked to go out to the Maasai tribe land, and where you went to a village and you start playing an instrument and you wave them to get their instruments out, and then you kind of recede because you want to wait and listen. You want to hear their rhythms, which you likened in this book to this similar rhythms to the Charleston, from the 20s, Charleston. And then later, one of the tribesmen says to you, well, Satchmo came a few years ago and he showed us his music. You come and listen to our music. And one thing I've noticed is how hard you work to get it right.
Well, the nice thing in music is you never get it right. And that's what's so challenging and so rewarding, because you realize there's something bigger than all of us. And music is a part of that big, vast thing that we will never really even understand, but which we can humble ourselves to and hopefully be part of. And they call that in Afro-Cuban music en conjunto, to be together, ser en conjunto, to be together. And when I was in Africa, I found that the same thing that you find in jazz and in bluegrass music and in string quartets by Beethoven, whatever it is, it's always the idea of having it be together, and all these different beautiful musics from the heart that are built to last share purity of intent and an exquisite choice of notes. and they're all different, just like the hundreds of languages. All are different. Each language has its variations, and they're all correct, and they're all worthy of study. And you're never going to get them all while you're alive, but at least you can try. And realizing that you're part of something that's much larger than you is very comforting. And when you see that, then you can get off the egotissimo narcissistic train that we're trained to be on to be somebody, and understand that while we're here, we can humble ourselves to something that's more than us. And if we can learn it, to share that with others. And once you do that, you have a much better life, and you don't have to pay a dope dealer, a guru, a new age hustler violating ancient religions, or anything else. You can just hang out, and everybody becomes your professor, and life itself becomes your campus. And you know that. I remember when you did the thing in Denver and had a Howard Zinn play, that was extraordinary. And that was
Yes,
my
you played Howard Zinn. You played two roles that night. You played Howard Zinn himself, the playwright who appears in the play, but also Tecumseh.
and that was really
Sang
a humbling
Lakota.
experience. Yeah, because all the Lakota people that I knew were so terrific. I could never equal what I learned from Floyd Redco Westerman and Vine Delory and so many people. But what I did learn was to be quiet, to listen, and have some respect. And the old Cheyenne saying, respect, love, and sharing, the Indian way. And then from Howard Zinn, when you played me some of the tapes of him just before he passed away, seeing with all his brilliance what a wonderful, approachable guy he was,
Yes.
warm, fun, and making students and listeners feel good. It was just wonderful to be around that and see all the other people who were in that production who weren't, many of them weren't professional actors, but boy, were they good because they loved it and they honored his words. And you made it possible for that to happen. I'll never forget that.
Well, I'm thinking that some of our listeners, viewers tonight may know you from the world of the 50s and the beats, and know your jazz music and all the people you collaborated with, and that you wrote the jazz scores to the original Manchurian Candidate and Wonderful Splendor in the Grass. But they may not know that you've composed nearly 200 orchestral and chamber works, and that you are in the top 10 most performed classical composers in the United States today. And what you have done, not only in the Maasai land or with the Lakota, but in places like this all over the world with native musics, as you've brought those into the world of the classical music hall. And I think that while Aaron Copland was kind of known as the people's composer, he captured the sounds of the West and Western America. Um, you are the people's composer who brings in to the classical world music from peoples all over the world. And you play so many instruments. Probably you play more instruments than anyone alive today. and so that way you learn to very early on to listen, to study, to work hard, shows up in all the different art forms you're engaged in.
Well, I appreciate, Dean, and I think the thing hopefully to encourage people is that whatever you do in life, you can learn from what you learn from other people who know more than you'll ever know and whose culture you might not be born into, but which you can learn to respect. So every piece that I've written is based on my symphonic variations on a song by Woody Guthrie. I knew Woody Guthrie, and when I went to Okima, Oklahoma, years later, after meeting him in 1956, 2005, I finally went to his hometown. Then I got a picture of what he was from, what he became, and the root of what he gave. And in all the other pieces that I've done, they're always sort of like Smetana's Scenes of My Life, or what so many of the great European composers did in the 18th and 19th century. They also were improvisers. Chopin was known as an improviser, and apparently it was difficult for him to sit down there and scratch it out, but he knew how to write it down so that someone who wasn't in his world could sense what he played. And Beethoven, when he included the program notes for the Pastoral Symphony with the birds singing, that was considered an anathema when I was studying composition. Program music was second rate. And the idea that you're supposed to judge composers by the way you might with Olympic bronze or gold medal winners, that's fine for sports and that's fine for anything. But that's got nothing to do with music or art or life. That has to do with branding and with commerce and with trying to put stuff in some kind of an order that it doesn't need to be in. Beauty, you don't need a welcome mat. You don't have to be a special person. It has to say something to you. It has to tell a story. So basically, I tried in everything I've done to be telling some kind of a story. And that's not complicated. And they don't, unfortunately, teach that way. But I was lucky to be taught that over and over and over again. So before I play any instrument in public, when I came back from Iran and the Middle East, I went to a dry cleaning store where a guy from Persia spent a whole bunch of time showing me some stuff that every 5-year-old knows, so that when I was demonstrating a little bit of that, I could get it right. And in the compositions that I do, my music copy says, "You're a control freak." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, you don't trust the musicians. I say, of course I do. They're sitting there, they're unpacking their instrument. They're all like a brain surgeon, brilliant, incredibly well-versed, brilliant at what they do. And when they unpack that instrument and sit down and pick up a piece of music, if they don't know exactly what it's supposed to be, they're not in a position to feel anything and be creative themselves. They're just trying to figure out, how the heck do I get through this? And why didn't I go to dental school? So as a composer, you try to make everything as clear as possible. And then hopefully the person playing it or singing it, or if they're conducting it, will feel something themselves, inside themselves. And that feeling then becomes part of what the listener hears. So you're just part of the whole. Just like when
Yeah.
Shakespeare wrote the wonderful soliloquy for Hamlet, if someone said, "To be or not to be, that's a question." That is to be or not to be. That is the question, is what Shakespeare wrote. But there are better ways of doing it than that. And the interpretation can only really be moving if the person has something to interpret. And unfortunately, they don't teach. Kurt Vonnegut told me before I wrote my last book, and I was speaking to him, and he liked kind of what I did. He said, "Just remember one thing, David, write the way you talk." And just as Alfred Leslie said to us, don't act, be yourself. And of course, the real great
Yes.
actors are themselves, but they make that character themselves. They become that character. And then you see that magic where they're actually creating life on the stage or in the film. And that's a magical, extraordinary thing. And when it happens, it blows you away. And all the arts are that way. You see, I used to sit in front of the Rembrandt and Renoir paintings and just stare at them, and then get off at a distance, then get real close and see what they did with their brushwork. And somehow those paintings, they could speak to you. And I think all the arts do that. And you were such a big help to me when I was editing my long, sprawling, overdone stuff. And you would give me a few hints, and I thought, boy, it's just like being at the farm. When someone said, "That's great, but remember when you're plowing, if you don't keep a straight line, the tractor's going to drive over half the things you planted because you're zigzagging. Just keep a straight line, keep it simple." And that kind of direction is something that we all need. We all need an editor. Frank McCourt said it best when I told him that I had to edit out a big hunk of the book. I wish he'd seen that part. He said, he said, Norman Mailer, Kurt Vonnegut, he said, those guys don't need much editing. But for mere mortals like ourselves, we need all the help we can get. And
I'm glad you mentioned Frank McCourt, of course, the very famous author of the Pulitzer Prize winning Angela's Ashes, one of the most beautiful novels of the last 50 years. And he, in fact, wrote the foreword. You arranged so that he would write the foreword to Upbeat, a book that I published at my publishing house years ago. And one of the passages here from Frank McCourt is, Amram is an octogenarian, but he would exhaust fourth graders on the playground.
Well,
and indeed, David, you're often up till 3 in the morning on the phone with somebody in Europe, and then you're up at 6 a.m. and you're always at work.
Well, my composition teacher, Vittorio Giannini, I'd be playing with Charles Mingus till 3 in the morning and then get up at 7 and go to school. I'd be, And he said, don't yawn. He said, sleep's a waste of time. And he was so brilliant. And he wrote music. I mean, he wrote so much music and he taught it at about 5 schools. So I think he was saying not so much sleep's a waste of time, but when you're awake, use that time to do something. And Jack Kerouac, who was such a serious, he always carried that little notebook with him. And he was all up until he died, even though he was so messed up at the end, drinking and despairing and feeling so neglected and all out of fashion, and his friends left us. He was writing up until the last minute and was such a hard worker. And Joan Mitchell, a wonderful painter whom I knew, she was, and all those painters and actors and people that I know, man, they're hard workers and they make you feel good when you're with them. And when they do what they do, they make it appear effortless. And that's the key.
Yes.
And that
Well,
doesn't
David,
happen.
I think what first drew me so much to your writing, and I was just actually reading some of the reviews that came out on Upbeat when it was published in the Jazz Times and other magazines, and the reviewers really marvel at your memory for the detail. And I think that you were at this crossroads, as you see in the chapter about, all these famous photographers, Robert Frank and Alfred Leslie, and the writers and actress, and you are a chronicler of the 1950s. And I want to build up to a question here, but first, I just want to comment that you're always writing a chronicle every day in letters to friends, many of which in Lincoln Center where people can see them along with your scores and your manuscripts. But you're always writing about your excitement in the moment at the times. And many of these letters or emails find their ways into your books. But also, you're also revising and writing fresh new material for your books. So we might be sitting there working together and suddenly say, oh yeah, I should put in a piece here about first time I met Woody Guthrie. And so then you usually tell me the story, and it's all in all this wonderful, vivid detail. You can sit there and write it. And I think also your memory and the way it works in your composing, because sometimes you've composed at the piano here in our house. And I remember one time you went to the piano, I think it was E flat, and you struck E flat, and you struck it again and again. And this went on for about 45 minutes, just E flat.
I know.
Of course, you are listening to the overtones, and of course, in your head, you're mapping, from hearing those overtones, you're mapping out a whole section of maybe it was part of the Woody Guthrie we're working on. But then you can sit down and write it down, because your memory could just map out that 45 minutes of listening to the overtones that help guide your imagination.
Well, also, Dean, since I don't know how to use a computer for music. I wish I did. I use the eraser and the wastebasket a lot too. And then then when I'm done writing the whole piece, if it's for an orchestra, then I change gears and say, man, I got to conduct this. And then I go over it with a whole different head, say, what? Wait a minute, that's too slow. That's too fast. That's this and that. I spend a lot of time so that I can try to get it right. And I only say that because some people think, well, if it's something to do with Jack Kerouac or the beat that you're saying, whatever, like let's all drop acid, it's all going to come direct from God, whatever. That's fine too. I mean, there's some people like that, I guess, but Mozart had the thing written in his head before he wrote it down at the very end of that wonderful movie. They show him dictating the piece to Salieri. He knew what it was. When Jack made his 10th, not his first Stoned on Benzodrine, which he wasn't, he only drank coffee when he wrote. When he made his 10th version of On the Road, he already had 9 other versions that he did. So he was ready and improvised on what he already had done. And that's not my opinion. That's in the Berg Library. So the old branding, I forget, reviews said it was a slob that was a fast typist. That's understandable. Everybody can't love everybody. The reality is he worked hard as a writer and was careful and edited stuff himself and found a way to make it sound natural. And when he improvised, he was a killer. And he was able to get that improvisatory quality in what he did. And that's what the great composers of the past and the present have done. And when you hear Bela Bartok and early Stravinsky and George Gershwin and people like that, and Duke Ellington and Monk, different idioms, different people, but they all make it sound right and make it sound natural, and it speaks to you. And the great Russian composers, Prokofiev and Shostakovich and Benjamin Britten, all the people that made us feel we could dare to do something of our culture and what we felt and heard, not to annihilate the opposition, but to contribute to the repertoire. That's what Leonard Bernstein told me as the first composer in residence with the Philharmonic. He said, David, your job is not just to please yourself. You're supposed to contribute something to the repertoire. In other words, you're there with your lunch basket, standing in line behind Beethoven, Bach, and all those other people, and you're trying to put something that might be of value. And that's a very heavy and important thing, but that's not the way often we're trained, especially if you're doing a hopeless task like being in the arts. Then you're supposed to be a loser by definition, but you're supposed to be the greatest of the losers. And when you get past that and say, wait a minute, man, there's some standards. That's what Thelonious Monk said. They said, Mr. Monk, people thought you were crazy, and now you're on the cover of Time magazine, and Columbia Records has you signed with them, and finally you're getting recognized as a great pianist, a great improviser, and a wonderful composer. What are your favorite songs? He said, all of them. There was a big pause, like, wait a minute. They said, well, what do you do, Mr. Monk, if you have one you don't like? He said, I don't put it out. There was another. And then he said the killer line, I have standards. And that ended the interview because the interviewer was trying, thought he's supposed to be Mr. Nutcase. And it turned out he was a Mr. Wise Man who was truly wise and worked so hard and loved what he did. And all the people that we think of are so different. So I only mention that for all the things that you've published and have done of different genres, and the fact that you studied composition, that was a blessing in my life. And Sterling Lord, the great representative of Jack Kerouac, said, David, congratulations, you've broken Jack's record. I said, uh-oh, what was it? He said, you got more rejections than Jack did. And then I met you. And after being told, you suck, not quite that way, but essentially, if they even paid attention, they thought that I sucked. Well, half the time. I finally got one yes and got the joy of meeting you. So I always tell people, the no's are part of the vocabulary, but all you need is one yes. So for all the people watching who are told, you suck, that's a constitutional privilege of everybody's First Amendment right to tell you how awful you are, especially if they haven't even paid any attention to why you're so awful. But
So
if you can
David,
find-
I don't want to bust in on you
Oh,
right now, but we're going to get to Q&A pretty soon. So
great.
I'd love to hear some more from Dean. And I know he wanted to talk to James Canary. I'm
too.
interested to know how, Dean, did you begin? Did you like to read when you were a little kid? What steered you in the direction of literature? And what's your story?
Yes, I grew up in a reading family, and I'm happy to say that my two daughters are big readers too. And really, I was just trying to escape law school, and I stumbled into publishing, and I've been really happy ever since. So I've been a publisher for 41 years now, and it's a wonderful kind of work, and particularly since I make the arrangements with the book, authors seek me and I seek authors, and I make the book contracts, and I make suggestions about books and try to make sure that they're published properly.
But how did that happen? You started your own company and then you are sharing in now with another company. So how do you do that?
First, before I started my own company, I spent 20 years in publishing, building up connections with authors from around the world. And so by the time I started my own publishing house in 2003, and I met David the next year in 2004, I've often said that an editor, being someone's editor is like being their pediatrician, care of their baby, right? And so, and that's why authors often go with editors they like, and sometimes often they stay with them. And because they trust them to look out for their works, their creative works. And so by the time I started a publishing house, I had built up a lot of that trust and confidence, and I found funding to start it. But later, when my largest investor, who was getting quite old, needed to be bought out, we instead sold Paradigm Publishers to Routledge, one of the world's biggest publishers today, based in London, founded in 1795. So I happily work from my home in Boulder in publishing now. But, I think what first drew me so much to David's writing, I said a moment ago that he chronicles the times, and these times were so fascinating. And finally, I'll read up to my question back to David, because it's after the long years of the Great Depression and the World War II, and the American economy is beginning to boom, and the middle class is developing, mass consumerism is starting. People start to have televisions in their home, and they have more than one car, just as, Kerouac On the Road sets off in the car trips. Well, these were all brand new things. And yet it was the time of the Cold War and the Red Scare and the bomb, and these artists that you perform with in the film were all trying to chronicle and critique those times in very new ways. And then I believe, David, in the chapter you just read, that you may have left off a final piece I want to ask you about, because I think it ends with you saying you and Jack knew the 50s were over.
Yeah.
Time was over. And indeed, soon Kennedy would be elected and we went into a very different time. How did you, of course it was 1959, but how did you know that was the moment?
I think the same way that Miles Davis did when he made Kind of Blue in 1959. It was a farewell and the entrance to a new chapter and a new world. And then here we are in 2020, and so many of the things that we did back then now have a new voice and a new meaning for younger people today who would like to do something reflecting their times. And in turn, we were the recipients of those who came before us, who went through the Depression, not as we did as children, we're very young folks, but lived through that somehow and struggled and came out, and the Dust Bowl and all that, and went through some amazing stuff in a world war. And somehow the world continued to go on. Robert Frost said it best. I understand now what it's all about in 3 words. It goes on. So I think when Miles Davis in the 1959 record, one of his great songs was called So What?
Right.
And they always, people said, well, your 90th birthday is coming up. All those world things around there are going to celebrate. Nothing's happening because of COVID. I said, remember Miles? So what? Remember Charlie Parker? Now is the time. And I think that's kind of what I figured. And then the idea is also not to ever say those were the good old days and anybody that wasn't there. And people say to me, I wish I was there then. I say, man, you're right at the perfect time, which is right now. Now is the time. Always was, always will be. And Charlie Parker told me that in 1952 when I asked him. He said, now was, is, and will always be the time because now is the right time.
Beautiful. Could we squeeze in a question from Joyce? She had a question for a guest last week and we missed Joyce. Can we say hello, Joyce? Did you have something to say today?
Hello. Hi.
Hi. How
How
are
are
you?
you? Good. How are you?
Excellent.
Well, I
Nice to
didn't-
see you.
Thank you. It's not so much a question, but I wanted to make a few comments on what people talked about in the last couple of weeks. And the first week, that piano player, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, from the Love and Spoonful, and you were talking, David, about inspiring young people. And the second week, Bill was talking about how gracious you were and generous with your time when he came by with some young people to see you. And I want to say, when I was a young person, that you were generous and inspiring and to me, because when I met you, you opened up some doors to me to interesting stuff that I would have never necessarily had the experience with. Like one time you took me with you to see Zoot Sims play, and I got to meet him. And it was just, we were sitting right in the front, and it was just like an amazing experience. And another time I got to listen intently to you and Dave Van Ronk sitting at a table and someplace on Christopher Street or something underground, maybe near where the 55 bar is, but it was some other place. I can't think of the name of it. And just marveling at listening to you converse together. And then another time going to see your premiere at the New York Philharmonic when you were conducting and being backstage with Leopold Stokowski and all these people. And just that you are so eclectic, that you inspired me to know that I could be eclectic.
Good.
And that wasn't something that was just me having lots of ideas. I want to try different things, that you were a person putting it into practice in a very dramatic and successful way. And that you had your feet in all these different worlds. And for me, it was a great inspiration. And so, I enjoyed singing your song, Pull My Daisy, and The Wind and the Rain from the Joe Papp Shakespeare in the Park. And I learned the penny whistle music, that's the Middle Eastern penny whistle music from your triple concerto. And that I really was inspired by you. And I want you to know that. And you were very generous with your time. For me, someone who, you brought me along with you to have experiences. And I appreciate that. And I'll never forget that.
Well, thank you. I can just say one thing, Joyce, and I don't want to interrupt you, which is I was repaying my tuition to those no longer here, so I couldn't pay tuition. In the great University of Hangoutology, people showed and continue to show me stuff for free. Some of the best things. So the only way I can thank them, I can't pay tuition, especially if they're currently expired. So my way to pay the tuition is to share that with other people. And I get as much out of it as possible. And the fact that you and I are still here and know each other, boy, you can't buy that. And that's a wonderful thing for everybody. Everybody is, I think we're all born that way. When you see kids, they're all creative, they're all artists, and they all hang out together and find some way when they're not arguing, fighting, wrestling, to be in harmony. And we're all that way until we're talked out of it. And I know you're still writing up a storm, and the last things you sent me were beautiful for the little column that you wrote. And when I've seen you in different venues and over the years, and some of your classmates, Jeff Kaufman, who's still, now he has the Ancient Trumpet Society, and some of the other people that we saw when I was at your college in 1970 in Hartford. And then when I went to East Hartford, I played Farm Aid there with Willie Nelson. I said, man, I know one person from there, which was you, Joyce Glassman. I said, everyone else is Glasgow, excuse me, pardon me. And that's the blessing in life, not only to remember to have old friends, and then you can make new friends.
Mhm. And I ended up going off and starting an experimental theater company
I know.
because that's something I wanted to do, and it was part of being eclectic and being able to sort of pioneer out into a direction that not many people were going into, and it was quite dramatic and fun to do that. But I wanted to ask you something, and that is right about the time when I met you is when you were appointed to the Philharmonic, the first and youngest, I guess, composer in residence, appointed by Leonard Bernstein. And you also had your jazz group with Pepper Adams and Jerry Dodgian, and you were doing all the folk stuff and the jazz and poetry and everything. And I was wondering, I mean, it's kind of maybe too big a question to ask, but how did all that come about? Like, how did you end up, being appointed by Leonard Bernstein to do this very classical stuff, and then and how did you start working with Jerry Dodgian and Pepper Adams?
Everything, including being on this, having this program, thanks to Pamela Dickerson. Otherwise, I don't know if my book ever would have come out eventually as an audible book until maybe after I expired. And meeting you, meeting Jim Canary, who's here today, and the wonderful artist, Mr. Wisdom, who's sketching away like mad, and all the people in this program, and all the people that I see in life, every single thing has just been a blessing and a fluke. Nothing was planned. As far as with Leonard Bernstein, Maurice Perez was chosen by him as an associate conductor out of the blue. And Maurice introduced me to him, and he said, oh, I know your music from Shakespeare in the Park. I could hear it through the window when he was living on 72nd Street, one of his many places in New York. Then I got this thing saying there were 200 composers. Would you like to apply as the first composer in residence? I figured, well, heck, I never went to Tanglewood. I never studied with Nadia Boulanger. I was considered to be an eccentric nutcase doing so many different things, but I was so used to having stuff come back. I just had a big pile of scores returned for about the 24th time. So I just changed the envelope, wrote it, and I got a phone call saying, you've been chosen to be the first composer in residence with the New York Philharmonic. I thought it was a joke or someone said it was the wrong address. And sure enough, that's what happened. It was just out of the blue, like a miracle. Still is a miracle. And the reason I have the book is because Pamela came to Beyond Baroque and had read my book with all her interest in all the books about that era and liked it and said, you should do something. And she and Anthony somehow were able to create this, which is so wonderful because the spirit of it is inclusive for everybody to feel they're part of the picture, not we're beat and you're not, so go shove it. That I'm familiar with that. I'm not judgmental, but the spirit of Jack Kerouac and all the people who inspired us was to try to be sharing and caring, work hard, do good work, and not be a creep, because that was already an overcrowded field and a non-growth industry. So every person that you mentioned. Jerry Dodgen I met because he came in as a sub once for someone else, and he was just so great. Pepper I met when he first came from Detroit, and we were at jam sessions, and he came with a whole group of great musicians from Detroit, and we became friends for years at jam sessions. And then finally, when I got the chance to work with him after George Barrow, who was great, decided to play Broadway shows and didn't want to only play jazz and starved to death, Pepper started playing with me. And when I was asked by the Triple Concerto, which Pepper, that you heard, Jerry Dodgen and Pepper played in that, because I was asked to write some or to play some Christmas carols with the jazz group while the orchestra played Silent Night or something and the audience sang. I said, we could do better than that. She said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, why don't we have a concerto for woodwind quintet, brass quintet, and jazz quintet? The woodwind quintet and brass quintet can be some of those great people in your orchestra who play up a storm, and have the jazz quintet there as 4 or 5 wonderful musicians who play up a storm, and have it be a triple concerto, like a concerto grosso, which was a thing in Bach's time. So they said, well, we can't afford that. I said, I don't care. I'll do it anyway. So like many of my pieces, when I was asked to write some trash, junk, garbage to fill up, I thought this is a chance to do something that might have some value. So rather than being a tax write-off, I considered it a chance to try to do something that might do what Leonard Bernstein suggested, which was make a contribution to the repertoire. And that's what all the musicians that I know and admire, and composers and artists in all the fields of the arts, were and are trying to do, and what they will always try to do. And those people who do that usually have a longer, slower trajectory, but they can create, with Dan Wakefield, one of the great writers of our time who's still alive, said he was advised it's all about the books on the shelves that you have written. And Dan's out in Indiana, and now they have a park named after him. And he was considered a bad boy after he wrote a big hit book about Indianapolis, because, and this has happened with every person that we can think about that we study in school, very often had a long, hard road, but they never gave up and they kept on trucking.
Beautiful.
Now, someone's got to ask Jim Canary a question, or Jim's got to ask
I agree.
Dean a question, because Jim is one of
James,
the...
can you unmic yourself? Maybe Joyce has a question for you too, and Dean. And if there's any other questions, if anyone raises your hand, then you just do this, and then we can, you need to open up your own mic on the bottom left corner. But if you have a question, we can get to you.
Well, this isn't really a question. I just was, you had mentioned Vonnegut and Dan Wakefield, and at our library, we have a wonderful collection of both. We have Dan's papers and we have Kurt Vonnegut's papers. And we did an exhibition of Kurt's work right before he passed away. And the exhibit started out with a case full of rejections. And then the entire exhibit came after that. So, you know, he never stopped. He used it almost as fuel to keep going, you know. It didn't let it stop him.
And so it goes.
A great way, yeah.
And Jim, maybe you could say something to the listeners about taking the scroll all over the world and how that inspires people.
This is the scroll of On the Road, yes.
Yeah, well, it was wonderful that Jim Irsay purchased it in the sense that he wanted to share it with the world and not just keep it for himself. And so it's been a great thing to take it around and have events around it, local poets and musicians coming together to celebrate the spirit of Jack's work. And I don't, it's been what, almost 18 years, 19 years it's been on the road. So it's been great.
It's really remarkable to see it, as I did in the exhibition in Denver, because for those who haven't seen it, it's a huge long scroll. I mean, it's at least 50 feet or 100 feet, I don't know, but it's typed
120.
120. It's typed margin to margin No paragraph breaks. It just rolls on completely covered, and you're just standing and watching, as you slowly go by and read it. And I remember taking David down to the train station in Denver because, well, you both took it on tour to the British Library, where it was next to a Shakespeare first folio and the Magna Carta and everything else in that wonderful room in the British Library. You were also took it on the rails across the United States, right? You transported it and showed it in San Francisco and Massachusetts and New York and other places.
Yeah, no, it's been in wonderful places, and really anxious to get some really good venues, hopefully for 2022 for the 100th anniversary of his birth. So
You
and
mentioned, I think the other day you mentioned Japan, that might be shown in Japan.
yeah, it was supposed to be in Japan this year, but they've rescheduled it for it'd be the 1st of July,
Wow.
2021, God willing, right?
David, you said earlier that Jack Kerouac had written, 7 drafts of it before, but he sort of knew when he was ready to actually type it out on that scroll. Is that what you were saying?
No, he had. I had so much of it in his head, and then when he was a very fast typer, so when he was kind of improvising, which he was so good at, he was improvising on something that he had already written painstakingly over a period of years and years. He remembered everything. My conducting teacher and guru that I dedicated my first book, Vibrations, in memory of, Dimitri Metropolis, had a photographic memory and could remember every note of every score, including Watzek, which is like really hard to
Wow.
conduct. And he said, no, he said, I trained myself. And every day he would sit there and study. So when he was conducting, he could look right at the musicians and see the score in his head, in his imagination at the same time, rather than going like that. And he explained to me, you can train your memory. So studying enabled me to do that, and then called paying attention ain't a bad idea either. And if you pay attention, it's amazing what you can hear. And I think the hard drive of your brain, everything is there. And when you get confused, you can hit an icon, bloop, and get some point of reference, and it all comes back. And that's why I mentioned to people, um, not having been exactly a health kick myself in my earlier years, that if you have any brain cells remaining from the partying, maybe it's good to keep those intact. And if you do, it's amazing what you can do, what you can think about, and what you can remember, and even what you've learned from other people smarter than you'll ever be, and be able to share that musically or verbally or in your conduct or whatever you do.
Or by painting, like Norton Wisdom. Should we check in with Norton, see what he's got going on there, David?
Absolutely.
We know how much Norton loves to talk on camera.
Well, I have a question for Norton, too.
Great. Go ahead, Joyce. Mm-hmm. Yes, we hear you.
Can Norton hear me? Yeah, he can hear me, right? Norton, I have a question. I have a question for you. Wherever you are, I can't see you.
You could scroll to your side, like swipe.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. We'll wait.
Okay. Where is he? I don't see him, but
Norton's waving
anyway.
to you. So just try. You know what? Let's be patient with Joyce and try to scroll. And you might have to go scroll to your left twice, maybe.
Turn your mic on too, Norton.
And if Norton's watching.
Oh, I see him. Okay.
Okay, great.
Hi, Norton. Okay. Hi. So my question for you is, I'm not that familiar with your work until this thing that you're doing now with David. And I was wondering if this is a general mode that you create sort of temporary pieces that in the moment, and then, maybe you memorialize them in photographs, but then you erase them and start over. And I'm kind of wondering if you do that a lot and what that's like for you to create art and then just kind of obliterate it and start over again. I don't know if obliterate's the right word, but just kind of And what you're doing that on, is that glass, or what medium are you using in your paint? And
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know if I can remember the beginning of this question, except that I'll start off with there's two parts, but the most important thing. Did you sing the song at the beginning of the Pull My Daisy?
No, no. But that woman, by the way, David, I don't remember her name, with the dark hair, who was with you on the album.
Anita Ellis was the one who sang it originally. That's
She
who
was
you heard.
great.
Yeah.
I loved her.
Up.
I loved
Thumbs
it.
up.
I
I'm
loved
just going
her
to
version.
pretend it was. I'm going to pretend it was you because you're gorgeous and you look like an angel. And I'd
She's
imagine.
Joyce Johnson too, by the way.
Anyway, that was anyway. That singing at the beginning of the movie is just it takes you, it transports you. About erasing my painting. Well, I assume you don't know how you don't. I assume you don't paint because the storage liability of an artist is mind-boggling, and every painting I don't have to store is a blessing. So if that kind of puts you in the right direction, and if you Google my name, you'll see these very simple abstract paintings in oil, most of them oil paintings that I've been doing since the late '60s, and those I work on for 30 years. Sometimes the paintings that look like they were done in a few minutes, I work on for years and decades. Kind of interesting. I don't know. To me, it's interesting, but anyway, and it's like the music. I get credit for what musicians do every night. They go and they play something absolutely inspired, and if you weren't there, right, you didn't get to appreciate it. And that's all I'm doing is what musicians do every night, and don't get any credit for it. So I erase a painting. Everybody goes, "Oh, Jesus Christ!" Just think about what a live performance of musicians, the value of that. Anyway, I don't mean to,
Well, Norton played the show. How long did the show go on? For a year at the Wisdom with the Pink Floyd show. Anthony was involved in that show and part of the creation of it also.
Yeah.
Every night, right?
Anyway, yeah. It was insane. If you Google it, the stuff I posted on YouTube is mind blowing. It's nutty. It was nutty. Anyway, and
some of the, I just want to say some of the audience members might appreciate your Sunday morning gig at the non-denominational church with Christoph Bull playing the organ is extraordinary.
Well, this morning, David mentioned I did this performance with Christoph Bull doing John Lennon's 80th birthday celebration Friday, and it was very cool. But today, Christoph Bull, who's one of the bad boys, just like you, David, of the pipe organ, because he drags a painter. Can you imagine the American Pipe Organ Society seeing one of their big performers dragging a painter into the cathedral to work? Anyway, we did Messiaen's Preludes this morning. They're available at the cathedral. And this cathedral has the largest pipe organ in a cathedral in the world, and it's here in LA, and your daughter should know about it. It's in Koreatown. 18,000 pipes. Wow. in this organ. And Christoph Bull is, well, Messiaen is, I don't know. What can I say? We all know what it is. Anyway, no, stop. I don't know if I answered any questions. I'm stopping.
Thank you, Norton.
David,
can I say something? Which is,
yes.
I heard his playing the organ as well, and that was him, I think, playing the piano later on, John Lennon's. But he started off playing some classical repertoire. I never in my life heard anybody play the organ and have it sound like that. It was just exquisite from and I called Pamela at the very beginning. I said, man, just the first few notes, I said, my God. I mean, he's an incredible organist, musician. He makes that thing speak and sound like it's singing to you. He's got it, whatever it is. He's like one of those gifted people, and he can take that gigantic thing and make it sound like it's talking to you and play all the counterpoint and all those complicated pieces and just make you feel that the composer's right there talking to you.
Now, I hope at the end of this session, you and I get to work for a few minutes together with you playing.
Oh, sure. We always end. I forgot.
Okay. Yes, it's getting to be 8:00. So I'd love to hear a goodbye with Dean and with James, and then we could play. And then we're going to, after a few minutes of that, we're going to put the tail end of Pull My Daisy. We actually edited out most of the beat antics and focused on David Amram, so and his music. So how's that sound?
Great. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, James. Thank you, Norton. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Anthony.
And I want to thank all of you who listen and hope that you'll tell your friends, your parents and grandparents if they're alive, and your children and grandchildren if they hang out with you, to be creative, to be sharing, to be caring. If they're interested in Jack Kerouac, he was a reflection of that spirit. And that's a spirit that wasn't unique to the 50s. That's a spirit that's been going on ever since Adam and Eve. And when they left the Garden of Eden, the rents were too high. Men and women have been scuffling, but there's always beauty if you can find it. So I'm going to end with this little piece I was supposed to play at the beginning, but I forgot to do it. And next week, Brenda Vaccaro, great actress, has agreed to come on the program and talk about the theater and what she's done her whole life as an actress in stage and screen, and what all of you watching can do. And Joyce, thank you for coming on the program, and all the other friends. If you didn't get a chance to speak, please be creative and share your blessings with others. See you next week.
Music that draws all the Irishmen, and down with the back rooms of Dublin. Jamambi, jabambi, jamak, jamak, jabambi, jabambi, jamak, jamak. And elder-twide old tweezies fighted the prize. Jamambi, 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 jamak. They say, wow, I said, let's do something we've never done. We've heard that. He says, come on, hey, let's play cowboys. I'm going to be a cowboy. No, I'll play a cowboy. No, I'll play a cowboy. He says, I'll do my Russian cowboy. No, boy, says Milo, I'll come over here and do my cowboy. Fellow got off a dusty old roan one time in southwest Pecos country and stepped up on the sidewalk and spurred jingles and said, Lord, because there was a preacher in there preaching. Yeah, says great. But at his feet was sitting a wino with his legs crossed drinking wine, saying, preacher, I understand you. And I aimed my gun right at him, and I said, don't you believe in God? Pow! What'd you do that for? Wow! All this nonsense. You've been doing this all the time. For years you've been doing this. They think it's very funny because they don't know anything about Time magazine. She says, no, this time we should have fed him some food. We should have done him good. We should have given, all the time you give him wine and beer and give him all these beatniks in the house. He says, shut up. He says, I didn't do nothing, and you know I didn't do nothing, and it's not bad. These are nice fellas. They're just sitting on, now they're getting up and they're leaving. I don't blame them for leaving. You don't understand. He said, come on, Milo, this is gang. Come on there, Peter, Gregory, Alan, let's go. Come on down those steps. Let's go. We'll go somewhere. We'll find something. Well, maybe we'll play by fires in the Bowery. She's crying. He says, come on. He says, don't cry. There's nothing to cry about. She says, what do you know about what to cry about? Milo! Milo! He says, I certainly do know what there is to cry about, and it ain't nothing that has to do anything with this that's happening right now. When the rose swings, she'll get over it. Come on, Milo. Here comes sweet Milo. Beautiful Milo. Hello, gang. Ta-da-ta-ta-ta. They're going ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Off they go.